Welcome to Ike's Flame. Join us on another Star Wars adventure. Punch it, Chewie. Hey, Ike here, and my little puppy friend, my wife and I's dog, again, and welcome back for part two of our interview with Andy. And I hope you guys enjoy this. I hope you guys get a lot out of it. And I hope you guys respect and understand where we're coming from, and I hope we respect you guys as we continue this conversation about spirituality and Star Wars. So listen in, and I hope you guys enjoy the second part of this interview with Andy.
I, for one, literally any interest I have in philosophy, psychology, comparative religion, and so on is purely because of Star Wars.
Yeah.
So I owe it a huge debt of gratitude for that. I think also it does another thing that's extremely important, and that's to say that you can read all the books in the world. You can have the most insightful understanding of the wisdom that's in these books.
Yeah.
You can even meditate 12 hours a day. But if it's not having a visceral impact on your personality, on your life, on your ethics, then it's there's no point. There has to be a follow through into the way it affects your real life. And I think the whole concept of having Jedi in Star Wars, who for sure are fallible and have human qualities of fallibility, do try and put what they learn and put what they know and put what they feel. There's a lot of reflection on feelings. Like, don't entirely trust your senses. They're helpful, but actually you've got to have all these inputs of information, be it emotion, be it knowledge, be it research, be it your senses, and so on. And to kind of get out of the way of yourself. The whole point of feeling the Force, I think, has got very close correlations with the relatively new science of flow research. There's a lot of research in the psychology literature now about how and why people enter into flow states. So for anyone that isn't aware, a flow state is something you will have experienced without even necessarily knowing it or knowing what it was called. You know, if you're playing sport or playing music, even reading a book, even watching a movie, doing any activity where your skill set is just being stretched to the challenge that is being set you get the similar kind of experiences again. So all your problems evaporate. You don't have time to think about your problems. You don't even really think of yourself as a self. It also can feel like you're not really doing it yourself. It is happening. There is a happening of which what was you is involved. And you speak to any sports person after they've just done some tremendous thing, and they'll be like, okay, that was great. I don't quite know what happened.
It's like a almost instinctual, like, what we go into this mode of, we rely on instincts, and what we know, and what, like, kind of that that sort of thing. Is that what you're kind of getting at with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely a line in one of the movies where I think Obi-Wan tells Luke to act on instinct. So that's exactly right. What I'd just clarify is that instinct is obviously innate. But it is something that can be trained. So it's not just something you're born with. And I'd say exactly the same thing for what we might call conscience. Like, everyone has one to a greater or lesser extent, but the conscience can also be trained. So there's a physical aspect, there's an emotional aspect, there's a mental aspect. And I'm not a dualist, so all of those are aspects of one fundamental similar thing. But training and discipline and all of those things, it's no joke. If you want to have agency in the world in a way that you want to be agentic, then all of those parts of the puzzle have to be in place. And the good news is, as you were saying, some of these wisdom texts are thousands of years old, but I still have quite a scientific kind of 21st century hat on as well. And so much of the science now is beginning to come into line, whether that's like the impact of meditation, whether it is encouraging ways in which to fall into flow states. So it doesn't just have to be when you're nailing a guitar piece that you know, or you hit a great tennis shot or whatever it is. You can literally trigger yourself to fall into those states, just slicing a tomato, or sitting in a traffic jam. So that's almost where the real skill is with that. I'd say also, just without wanting to get too technical, on the philosophy side, a lot of the metaphysics, and a lot of people kind of confuse mysticism with metaphysics. Metaphysics isn't something mystical. Metaphysics is basically the discussion in philosophy about what is most fundamental. You know, we've lived in a physicalist or materialist paradigm now for 200, 300 years, and with very good reason. When Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake in 1600, it's because he was saying things that the church didn't like. So the fledgling scientific community said collectively, right, church, you can keep soul and spirit and mind. We're just going to deal with this physical stuff and try and work out what's going on there. And, you know, we made tremendous progress over 200, 300 years doing that. But it doesn't mean to say that's metaphysically true. It doesn't mean to say the world is made of matter. It's a bit like saying trees are made of wood. It's kind of nonsensical. And for those viewers of yours who are keen to sort of delve into that side of things more deeply, there are two guys who I would really strongly recommend doing some research on, and they're all over YouTube and podcasting and so on. One of whom is Professor Douglas Hoffman, who's a cognitive neuroscientist, who's written a great book called The Case Against Reality. And the other would be Bernardo Kastrup, who is a Dutch researcher, super bright. And he's developed a philosophy called analytic idealism. So this is basically saying that they come from different angles, but the bottom line is this world of matter that we spend so much time kind of worrying about and getting bogged down is less fundamental than what has been known in the past as soul or spirit, and what scientists would now call consciousness. So even the hard-nosed scientific side of things is kind of coming in the direction of what we might call the force being fundamental. And it's not necessarily the same as God or as consciousness, but everyone's tried to point at the moon here. And everyone's stared at the fingers pointing at the moon. And we're now in a wonderful position to step back and say, okay, we can see the fingers pointing at the moon. Let's actually have a look at the moon now and see what that is.
Definitely. And that is interesting, because it's this, I mean, it's a, I think of it as a holistic approach to who we are as humans, as we're not just physical, we are, we're spiritual, we're emotional, we're and I mean other things you can throw in there as well, but we're starting to have this in our modern world. We're starting to have more of a holistic approach to who we are, and I think as we talk about Star Wars, I think Star Wars helps us to have more of this focus more on the soul or the spiritual or the emotional side of things, and have a holistic approach. And I wonder too if that, and that was interesting. You mentioned like really the past 200 or 300 years, we were really in this, unless you were in a religious, in some sort of religion or in church or whatever that is, like you were very focused. I mean, and even for those who were religious, there's definitely a focus on the physical. And so I wonder if Star Wars came along in a time where, hey, like we were so focused on the spirit or on the physical that like this spiritual, emotional side of things really intrigued people with the Force. And so that's a very interesting, like, Star Wars came into a society and a culture, and when in a time when people were focused on the physical, and so then it intrigued people in a way that they may have not have thought about before, or in a different aspect.
Well, certainly for my generation and your generation, I think that's definitely true. It's kind of not coincidental that the 1980s are known as possibly being the most materialistic decade in Western society.
Yeah.
For the whole of history. So those things are coincidental. But interestingly, it's actually one of the fundamental Taoist ideas is that when you hit one extreme at one end of the spectrum, that contains the seed of its opposite. So everything is fluctuating, shrinking, or growing. And I think it would be tough to argue that that's solely down to Star Wars or whatever, but I think Star Wars was definitely symptomatic of a necessity for a switch back away from that really quite hardcore pure materialism.
And it is a piece of that in the bigger picture, and especially when it comes to entertainment and that side of things, of looking at it from like an entertainment perspective, as also with the psychology and science and all that behind it, of the material to more of a spiritual side of that. Definitely, that's awesome. I loved like this conversation. You're getting my mind going and thinking some, and I've enjoyed this so much. So kind of transition a little bit in more directly the religious route. And like I said, you can share as much as you want. Like personally for you, when you think of Star Wars, you think of religion, and where you're at with religion. Like what is that connection for you? Is there a connection? And I know all this goes into the philosophy behind it, like we've been talking about. What does that religion piece look like for you?
Yeah, I've always had a slightly challenged relationship with the notion of religion, not with religion itself, but the notion of it.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I firmly believe that it's possible for each individual person to have a direct, unmediated connection to whatever the absolute is. That people might call God, I might call the Force. Someone else might call Brahman, someone else would call Buddha nature. We're all talking about the same fundamental thing. And unfortunately, in institutionalized religion, often just through power dynamics, it wasn't a theologian who came up with this idea of inserting layers of priesthood or money you have to pay even. I mean, it's so crazy. It's like God isn't poor. He doesn't want your money. He doesn't need your money. It's the church does, perhaps, or the temple does. So I've always had a slightly strained relationship with that side of it. But for all the mystical traditions, be they the Catholic mystics and the old Christian mystics, the Gnostics, the Sufis of Islam, so in the sort of Middle Eastern / Western, well, the Abrahamic faith, it's the same with Judaism as well. What's interesting is that the knowledge that you can have a direct communion with the totality became esoteric in the Abrahamic faiths. Whereas in the East, whether that was Taoism, Hinduism, or Buddhism, which Alan Watts, to refer to him again, described as Hinduism for export, which is kind of an interesting way of looking at it, that knowledge became exoteric. It was just what people accepted. To the extent that in India, when you say hello to someone, you say namaste, and namaste literally means I see the Godhead in you. That's just like day-to-day hi. So basically, I'm very open to all religious interpretation, irrespective of denomination or who it was that had the initial revelation, whether it was Buddha or Jesus or Muhammad or whoever it was. They were all having a fundamentally very similar and groundbreaking, earth-shattering experience, which then people turned into different slightly different directions, but so much similarity.
Mm.
So yeah, that's where I stand with it. My personal sort of favorites remain Taoism. I'm still very keen on that, but perhaps more from the Western tradition, I think the Quakers are phenomenal, and they have an unbelievable track record about anti-slavery, about equality between the sexes. They have no priesthood. There's no clergy, and their ceremonies are effectively silent. There's a bit at the end of meeting where people can feel, well, literally they call it their inner light. They become almost sort of forced to speak, or not forced to speak, but they feel a necessity to speak, or that something's going to speak through them. That's not far off for me. There are wonderful things you can kind of be influenced by and encouraged by, I think, in almost all religions. Whether I've got a soft spot for Zen. I mentioned the Sufis of Islam, who are I mean, you read Rumi and it's just mind blowing, or Kabir, those Islamic saints. The insight and the burning love that you feel coming through in their writing. I won't get too sort of political or anything, but it's such a shame that Islam in the last 100 years or so has been presented to us who are not Muslims in the sort of Wahhabist interpretation, which is super recent. And I hope and pray that dwindles and we can get a kind of increased Sufi influence on the Islam world. I think that would be great.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And I think, like, as you talk about all those, that's like, you can definitely see that connection back to Star Wars and how we do that. And definitely the Quakers, like, I have friends who are Quakers, so I definitely connect with that. And I think, like, one thing and kind of a theme I picked up as we've kind of talked today, and I think I just want to highlight is, and you've mentioned, is the fact that, like, there's so many similarities within different religions, within different philosophical thought. And I think for me, as I'm a Christian, I am in currently in the Nazarene denomination, and am very committed there, and a part of that, and even a part of leadership in that church. But for me, I think sometimes I love conversations like this because there's so much more we have in common than we have different.
Absolutely.
And we make such a divide between religions or political things or whatever that is for your context where you're at. And there's so many similarities and things we can talk about, we can discuss, and we can understand. And I think it goes back to the fact that we're all humans. We all have emotions. We all understand maybe some sort of a spiritual pull, regardless of how that manifests for each of us. And I think just that sense, and I have my personal beliefs and I have those beliefs, but I can also respect those of others and see how similarities, and we have conversations, and we can have, may I say, polite debates on who's right, who's wrong, or if all of us are right or all of us are wrong. And so it's
funny. I was going to say something similar. I think it's actually both. I firmly believe that, particularly in all of what used to be called, this sounds wrong to say it now, all the higher religions, they're all on, give or take, the right track. Whether they've been deviated from that track by personalities or culture is another matter entirely. But if you go back to the foundational teachings, there is such a similarity there. And it's very clear that you can reach communion with the absolute, or the force, as I would call it, by any number of different routes. That it's not just like one track. That yeah, you have to be open, I think, to all the different sorts.
Definitely. Yeah. And I mean, for me and my personal belief, and as a Christian, and as I believe there is one way to God, and that's part of my beliefs. But at the same time, I don't want to disrespect others in the sense of like, hey, you have that belief, and you have that, and also the fact that, like we talked about, there's similarities, there's things to that, and so like I think it's the understanding we can have those personal beliefs, but still not.
Well, you're not wrong.
Exile others, yeah.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You do have one way. To God.
Yeah.
And that may well be through the personhood of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And that is your way. And there's nothing wrong with you having a very, very firm faith in it, or even you could say a knowledge that is your way.
Yeah.
So I think it's possible, from the perspective we're both coming at, to hold these things together.
Yeah.
Like, they're not actually opposing views. The language can generate opposition.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
No, I hear you loud and clear on that, Isaac.
Yeah. So and I love to be able to have conversations like this, and have conversations that are respectful, that allows everybody to think and all that. And so I've really enjoyed this conversation today with you, Andy, and you've got me thinking about certain things, and like that maybe I want to go research more. And so as we end, I kind of want to end on this note of, like, with all this said, we've talked about a lot of things, we've used a lot of big words, and dived in a lot of different areas. I think there's a going back to this idea of spirituality in Star Wars, or philosophy in Star Wars. There's how it was created. We all have this natural pull because of how humans operate, how we the need and necessities that we have within us, that Star Wars is something that I think pulls at our heartstrings, pulls at who we are as humans. And I think you've done a great job today at kind of expressing that and helping, I know me, and I think others understand like what that looks like. So thanks for coming on, and I really appreciate our conversation and chatting about this.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the opportunity, Isaac. Thank you very much for the invitation. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation as well. And, you mentioned about us being human beings, but spiritual beings. There was a French philosopher called Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who said, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yeah.
And as soon as I read that, I was like, this dude sounds just like Yoda when he says,
yeah,
luminous beings are we.
Yeah.
So we should all remember, luminous beings are we.
Yep, not the crude matter, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great way, I think, to end our conversation today. So thanks for coming on. This was super awesome. We'll make sure for you guys listening, I'll get all of Andy's stuff in the description, YouTube and Instagram and all that, and you go check him out. Thanks for coming on. This has been a great conversation.
No, I appreciate that, Isaac. And if you ever want to do it again, just give me a shout.
We might do that. So for you guys listening, we might bring Andy back on, because I think we talked for about 45 minutes. I'm pretty sure I was sitting here thinking, I'm like, man, I could talk for another couple hours, I think.
Oh yeah, we've just scratched
into all this. That's super awesome.
It's the right way to start.
Yep, definitely. Awesome. Thank you, sir. And I hope you have a great day and a great weekend.
You too. Thanks.
Yep. Bye.
Hey y'all, I hope you guys enjoyed the second part of the interview and this interview as a whole, and just the aspects of spirituality. I hope this is something we can dig into more as a group here on Islam, on this community. And there's a lot of spiritual, religious things with Star Wars that don't get talked about. And I think I found it just interesting, even where George Lucas founded some of these ideas off of. And so I just I think it's going to be, I just think it's interesting. So I hope you guys enjoy this interview, and we might try to dive into some of this more in the future. So, hope you guys enjoyed all of this, and have a great week, and light the fire.